don't think that giving those resources and
you said it's going to be cut out.
Yeah, you were cutting out.
Maybe she's having a problem with the mute button.
Maybe she's in a glitch.
Oh yeah, should be right back. Her app was glitching. But yes, that's my general take. Puts Russia in a meat grinder. Although there does seem to be a strategic piece, which is if you put Russia in a meat grinder, the Russia-China Defense Pact has a harder time operating because the Russians are tied down in Ukraine, and they may not have either energy or military resources to redevote to helping China with its defensive strategy in Southeast Asia. Having said that, I had been on this kind of train, maybe a 400 ship Navy in 2039 or 2040, and while it takes time to gain the expertise of we recognize that we need to bulk up our Navy is a problem. We also have to deal with the Jones Act, which requires a lot of stuff to be manufactured. Why don't we look at buying destroyers from South Korea or Japan? They make fairly decent destroyers as I understand it. And that would help us push off some space in which to get our domestic manufacturing house back in order. Because at least as I understand it, the Navy is supposed to get something like 15 Indonesia and the Malacca Straits, and then out into the Indian Ocean to Diego Garcia U.S. Naval Base is 11,000 miles. So we can't out of the water on before they come back to port and get the needed repairs. That's why I'm really focused on the Navy in that way, because it's such a long distance that you can't do anything without an adequately functioning Navy. And I think we do still largely have an adequately functioning Navy, but the inability to get those ships when we need them is a severe.
I know you essentially compared Russia as basically a two-tier problem comparatively to China being our closest competitor that we need to be more concerned with, but don't you think that if we stand back and we cede to Russia keeping control as well, wouldn't that be bound to shift things for them if we just,
will only involve Vladimir Putin's want to roll into the rest of Eastern Europe and put the USSR back together.
Right.
However, Russia comes from the National Defense Estimate, which is something put together by our defense community and the different multilateral intelligence agencies, us being tied down in the quagmire of Iraq. Right, that allowed us to focus our attention on the Middle East, while China focused their attention on Africa and doing trade there and doing debt swap deals in which they'll build some ports and roads, but if you can't pay back for it, the Chinese government then owns it. So while I do think there's an imperative to tell Vladimir Putin, no, you can't have this stuff, China's always going to come in the number one position in the defense estimate, and Russia's always going to come in the number two position. Or at least it's been that way for most of my lifetime, I should say. Having said all of that, I can wait back to the Russians. And if the Europeans get involved fighting the Russians on the ground, it could draw the United States into that, which is, as I said earlier, nobody in the United States wants to go to war. They're just not interested. And also, if the Europeans want to get involved that way, I don't necessarily see a problem with the Europeans doing the European thing, right? It's territory that's closer to them than it is to us. But if the United States were to get involved and have to put, the 82nd Airborne on the ground in Ukraine, we would get this idea that ideologically we might want not one more ranch. Practically, we don't have the resources or the public support to ensure that, right? We have the public support to ensure buildup of U.S. Navy to confront China, but we don't have a popular idea that submitting U.S. troops on the ground would be a good idea. So I think in answer to your question, as much as I would like to stop from giving one more inch, I think the best we're going to get out of this is some sort of a meat grinder like Korea. And it's still within U.S. national interest to have the Russians grind themselves up in the meat grinder, right? But it may not be within our national interest right away to help put troops on the ground or to spend, one night in a field. So I always tend to go for practical over ideological because that's the real world, not practical, right?
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah, hopefully that helps.
So I just wanted to chime in on something you said, Marshall. Ordering ships from Korea, I'll let Captain speak to that a little bit because he knows more about the subs and some of those. But you would never pay someone like me to go on a Korean-made destroyer. The best that they can produce with our Aegis class weapon systems is probably comparable to the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers that we have. And most of the world kind of falls either just beneath that or on par with them. They're nowhere near us in one class. 5 destroyers every couple of years from Korea would severely impact their resources. They wouldn't be able to meet the demands right off the bat. Secondly, when we talk about shipbuilding, U.S. Navy ships, just to give you a record, we test them. We actually do explosives. We run them through the gamut. Like you have to have sharp pumps from impacts. I think the USS Cole, for instance, had a hole in its side and it still stayed afloat. Our ships are designed in such a way to actually absorb impacts or take an impact and still function. It takes a lot to sink a U.S. Navy ship. Korea does make a good boat. However, they're not comparable to ours. They're about our ships have a lot of other things that we adapt that came from us. Like most specifically, I would not say that Korea could supplant a U.S. Navy ship. Also, not to mention that China would take drones. Watch that. That's a little bit too close to home. You'd have Russia doing the same thing, and they would gain tactical advantages watching these in the shipyards being built over a few years. But sorry.
Let me intervene here. We're getting off topic. It's a great big how do we rebuild our defense establishment so that we can go one-on-one with China to wear down in a meat grinder faster than Ukraine, maybe. So let's talk about Friday night after Trump and Putin have their session. Would it be in the best interest of the United States and NATO and Ukraine if Putin refuses to give an inch and Trump recognizes that, he walks out of the room and to Europe, which Europe buys and then gives to Ukraine, we're going to continue the grinder and we're going to wait and see which side wears down faster and sues for unilateral peace, maybe not unconditional surrender, but which side is going to surrender first. Is that the best it could come out of this session with Putin this coming Friday?
If I could jump in, is it the best scenario? No, right? Is it the most likely and the most probable? Yeah. Unless, as I mentioned before,
what is the best scenario, Rob?
the best scenario is they find a way to make a deal and cut it out, right? The best scenario is they find a way, Donald Trump understanding, for lack of a better term, the strongman ethos, right? Let me give you cover to save face in front of your people. Not that he necessarily cares, but Putin cares about his image. As Frank mentioned in the chat, he controls the narrative that the Russian people will get, and he doesn't care, right? He doesn't care about that. He does care about his image. So if he has cover to lack of a better term, to retreat, right, and still call it a win, he'll take it. Right, and Ukraine could say the same thing, right? Ukraine, I believe, just wants the war to stop and leave us alone, that kind of situation. But Russia needs to save face. That's the best scenario to come out of this meeting. That's the best scenario. Is it the most? No, but it is the best.
but you agree that Ukraine has to cede significant land to Russia in order to achieve that outcome this Friday, right?
From a pragmatic perspective, they have to give up something. Yeah, they have to give Russia a reason to want to say, "I'll stop." Right? I don't think that he will. I don't think he's not incentivized to do so. The only incentive for Zelensky to do that is if the United States, vis-a-vis NATO, says we're done. We don't have the capacity anymore. We don't have we can't. I'm not going to do it. Right? If the United States says that, then Ukraine doesn't have the prerogative, and they'll try to cut the best deal that they can, even if that means giving up some land. But if the United States stays in it, stays funding NATO, stays giving intelligence, stays giving weapons and money and things like that, we can last as long as the United States can last, which we assume to be forever, right? And Russia's going to say, well, I'm going to stay in it too. That's also a very real possibility. I defer to Marshall. He's a little smarter than me in these kinds of things, but from my experience, the most probable scenario is that it just keeps going on. I think the most probable scenario is nothing changes. They had a good fucking talk, they had something to eat, and it stays the same. I think that's the most probable, unfortunately.
Are you asking like how to win while getting a peace at some point, Captain?
No, I'm not. I'm basically going to rely on your position that Russia's losing the war faster than Ukraine is, and we keep the pressure on through current sanctions, more sanctions, continuing to resupply Ukraine vis-a-vis Europe so it doesn't cost us any money. In other words, is that the best way to go in the best interest of the United States this coming weekend? Do you think it is? I think that was your position, that Putin's going to lose this faster than Ukraine is, so let's keep the pressure on and let's wait and see what happens in the future, right?
That's only if U.S. and European forces, NATO overall, and maybe India and South Korea, if these countries come to some agreement to supply Ukraine. India is going to stay in the middle road. They don't want any part of it. South Korea has been supplying their weapons. NATO is like, it's just a whole mess there, sir. So I would say unless Trump is going to lead the front, and again, we're right back at square one where we're going to do funding, and it depends on how fast that aid would get to Ukraine. I think if you dropped massive amounts of aid, and I mean military weapons to Ukraine, could they rally and actually push Russia? Most likely, most definitely. If you gave them the right systems, you gave them the right air support, and the U.S. said, you know what, hell with this, we're just going to put a blockade in the Black Sea. Good luck. Sir, I think you'd have a winning strategy. Also, if I were Zelensky, I would be funneling, low-tiered explosives, weapons to the centers in Russia, saying, blow up spaces. Some of you may not like that. I would orchestrate that. I would say, this is for my nation. I'm one that says the rules of war can be changed. I would also say, if everybody was serious about it, Putin is this evil guy. Well, if I was Zelensky, I would probably try to orchestrate a team to assassinate him. I would just do that. I mean, what are they going to do? Hold him as a war criminal? No one's called for that yet. I mean, some Republicans will, some MAGA types will, some on the left will, but no one's going to really do anything against Zelensky.
So again, summarizing, if I may, Brad says keep fighting, and keep fighting harder than the current status quo. And the only thing I would suggest that is a problem with that is if we stay in the position of we're continuing to use our military-industrial complex to provide the bulk of the material to sell to Ukraine, I don't think our military-industrial complex at this point can keep up with the war. I think that we are scraping the bottom of the barrel to produce enough weapons right now just to keep Ukraine supplied. Can we fight harder from the United United States, and it's going to be a very expensive one.
May I ask a sort of an elementary question?
Sure, go ahead.
Do we know why we're supporting Ukraine and say that the U.S. and European partners, allies, are supporting Ukraine? Do we understand why we're doing that?
I think we do. We're supporting them because Vladimir Putin has decided to break the agreement post World War II, which is that countries don't wantonly take other countries' land, despite the fact that Putin considers it a buffer zone.
Okay, so we're funding a war to enforce rules or guidelines.
I believe that the United States has been doing this based on moral principles that, since World War II, if you invade another country, position, by the way, but we're certainly unable to enforce it in Ukraine for the last 4 years.
Wars aren't over morality.
He doesn't have anybody
Perhaps more often
anymore
they're over
like he had the first time round.
So,
he did have some people.
I think it's my perspective that is maybe not well understood by the general public that the resources, or more specifically, the land that Putin has occupied and now occupies, how resource rich and important those resources are to the energy security of our greatest allies in Europe, and how that if those resources were to go into the hands of Russia, they further their monopoly on both oil and natural gas. And if you've ever been a consumer in a monopoly, it's very difficult. It's untenable, and there are few ways out. So I'd say that as long as people have a greater understanding that we're providing support to the Ukrainians, and I hope to some degree European partners are as well, they certainly need to step up their game.
They did not say, let
a
us
lot of
bring in, some community
the
leaders.
energy needs of Europe, and therefore trade amongst the world as it is today, depends on us not giving up that land. Not because of lives or relations, but because of resources, which is the basis of most conflict in the world. It's over resources.
We've got a new guy on the stage that I don't know how, Phil, I don't know how long you've been listening, but we're really wrestling with this problem, and I wonder if you've got any insights as to cessation of land, what should happen on Friday, etc. You want to contribute your insight?
Thank you, Hanson. Listen, I can talk militarily, i.e. the Allies, the Russians went all the way to Berlin. The Germans could not put another army in the field, defeated militarily. If you look at Vietnam, America lost that war politically. So the North Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, did not go all the way to what is going on with Russia and Ukraine. So if we look at this, it's an asymmetric war, i.e. the Russians actually could wipe the Ukrainians out tomorrow by dropping nuclear bombs. They're not going to do that because it'd be the end of the world. And even if they did a relatively small nuclear strike, the whole world would turn against them. It'd be such a ratcheting up. But on paper, it's an asymmetrical fight. So what are they actually fighting for? The Russians thought they could knock the Ukrainians out of the field militarily by going all the way to Kiev, having a regime change, and then they could then take the land in the east, which is exactly actually what they've done. However, the Ukrainians were fighting to defend their land and hoping that at some point the cost would be too high for the Russians. the fact of the matter is that from a Western perspective, we don't know when civil society will collapse in Russia, i.e. the institutions away from the state will just say, this is too expensive a fight. Somebody said on this stage that 1 million Russians there have been 1 million Russian casualties. That appears to be the Western consensus. We don't really know, but it appears to be the consensus. And if you look at when Russia fought the war in Afghanistan, it was much less Russian casualties, which then caused Russian mothers to complain and to demonstrate in Moscow, St. Petersburg, etc., and so we need to bring our boys home. But Putin has a much more iron grip on Russian society and the political apparatus than Gorbachev did at the end of the Soviet Union. So, rationally, the Ukrainians are going to have to give up some land regardless. Crimea is gone. The West has tacitly admitted that since 2014. That's gone. It ain't ever coming back in a plausible scenario. If you look at a map, it's a quiet secret here. If you look at a map of the formation of the Ukraine when it was part of the Soviet Union in 1922-24, those eastern bits which the Russians wanted and have occupied were not part of the new state of Ukraine, the Soviet state of Ukraine. Actually, what the Russians have done is literally got all of their war aims, apart from having an acquiescent regime in Kiev. So, what are the Ukrainians fighting for? And bear in mind, I'm on the side of the Ukrainians in this fight. They fought for their independence as a state away from the Russian yoke. They fought for that. They've managed to do that, and they've fought a new national identity, which is much less Russian than it was before. And I forget what the percentage of the Ukrainian state was. They can valiantly say, we have defined who we are as a people, and actually they can walk away with this with honor. It feels like a relative defeat, but actually their political independence has been kept. I rest my case.
Mr. Royfield, I still have that bottle of bourbon made by that great assistant distiller for you sitting at the cottage.
Next time I'm in the great snowy north of the United States, my friend, I will come look you up.
Yeah, promises. You say that about the next time you're in the Pacific Northwest, and then suspiciously, your trip comes and goes, no phone call, no look.
Wait a minute. I have not been to the Pacific Northwest in forever. I haven't admittedly been to the great state of Minnesota.
Fair enough. Look, we have 15 minutes left in this room. This is a good opportunity for people to get their last thoughts. And want to just welcome anyone that hasn't spoken yet to get those off. And then I'd love to hear, Anson, your conclusion after hearing people's points. What you think? So anyone that hasn't spoke, go now.
And stick around, Royfield, because I really would like to get your feedback on what I'm going to say in the next 10 minutes or so.
Okay, nobody's speaking.
I was waiting for new speakers that just didn't get a chance, but I disagree with Royfield on the political independence. I think, unfortunately for Ukraine, they have too many devils they're dancing with, too many high-level interests. If I was Ukraine, I'd be wary of the U.S. I'd be wary of taking a dime. It comes with conditions, and the U.S. is notorious for exacting its price. It will get double what it invested in. The same thing in Europe. I don't think it's really truly independence that goes, but I mean we can discuss the rationale of the Andrea Newland types or Victoria Newlands, whichever ones you want to. I'm sorry, I keep getting those names mixed up. But if we're going to, I don't know if they've actually won the optics of having political independence from Russia. If the fact is that Russia can still influence their elections as well as the U.S.
Okay, it's not quite a binary in the way that you posed it, I would say. more Ukrainians than didn't prior to the invasion wanted some level of a closer alignment with the EU. And they wanted eventual accession to the EU. And that's not an opinion, that's just a fact. And you had changes in regime, Yanukovych, etc., in Ukraine, which kind of mirrored that. But there was a strong element, people in the east, people in the south, who were ethnically Russian, or at least spoke Russian as their first tongue, who wanted to more align the state with Russia. Now, if those territories have been cleaved off and now part of Russia, the demographics alone will tell you you have a more homogeneously Ukrainian state. Again, that's not rocket science, that's just a practicality on the ground. So, whether the Ukrainian state is going to be in the pay to America, I would kind of question that in the medium to long term, but they have fought and won their independence away from being part of the Russian sphere of influence. And Wheel made a point, which I thought was quite clever. He said, why are we backing the Ukrainians in this? And Anson, or somebody else kind of, I think it was Marshall, sorry, answered this by saying this was a point of other people's land. And whilst that is true, the real politics of it is, if this had happened in, I don't know, Asia or Africa, we wouldn't really be that bothered. The West is more bothered about this because A, it's Europe, and B, these countries, the next countries potentially to be threatened are the Baltics, who are part of NATO, and so they get incredibly jumpy. So you have to then understand. Yeah, 1 minute, son. My son's at the door. You have to understand in the wider geopolitical context, the Ukrainians have pushed themselves away from Russian influence. That's a fact.
I just have one question, which is, by giving this land, we achieve what objective?
Peace.
You mean getting Ukraine?
Yeah, by giving away portions of Ukraine, again, ignoring the resource-rich nature, we receive peace. Because I'm not much of a historian, Captain, you know more than I do, and have a greater perspective. Has that occurred other times in life where we've successfully given land and it's resulted in long-term lasting peace?
I don't know. I'm not an expert on American history, but I'd say maybe Vietnam, maybe.
There are loads of instances throughout history where there have been peace treaties which have been concluded.
Just like one or two, not a lot.
Well, you could go to the Congress of Vienna in 1815 when we defeat Napoleon, and actually what the Allies don't do is carve France up into pieces. Basically, the French national borders of today are the French national borders which were defined by the by the Congress of Vienna in 1815, and the French were defeated. Like, they basically are the same. So there are loads of examples. Another example of a political defeat over a military one is the American War of Independence. Yorktown did not mean that the British couldn't put any more troops in North America. There were troops occupying New York 2 years after Yorktown. But it was a political defeat. The British just said, us to keep on fighting this is just too expensive. Give them their bloody independence. So there is a rationality to a lot of this, which in hindsight makes complete utter sense. It might feel bitter at that moment, but you look at it in hindsight and you say, inch of land. But they're fighting an asymmetric war. It's not two equal powers going up against themselves. It's much more, much bigger military, etc. That doesn't mean necessarily they're going to win the war militarily. The Ukrainians could keep fighting until the Russians just kind of give up. But how long is that going to take is the question. And do the Ukrainians have the political will to keep on fighting? However, with the accession of Trump, what has happened to NATO is that all of the NATO countries are now spending much more on defense. Is that European support enough to substitute for American? No, not yet. But there is a scenario, I would say, but for what? They're not going to roll back anytime soon. The losses that have been made to Russia, there needs to be a political.
Royfield, I think everybody know at this point that it's not Ukraine versus Russia per se. I think it's, of course, a couple of months, maybe 2-3 months.
That's not true. That's not true. There's a large element of truth to what you're saying, but that initial push by the Russians, where they thought they could just go down from the north and be in Kiev in 2 to 3 days, what stopped them wasn't NATO. That was this will and the resolve of the Ukrainian army. And to be honest, the incompetence of the Russians, because they thought they were just going to go in and in effect have a coup d'etat and put a Russian-leading government there. They were not properly prepared for a long war. So they just trundled in. But it was the Ukrainians' fortitude and determination which turned them back. It absolutely was. Don't get me wrong, what has kept them going has been NATO arms, which is really a pseudonym for American arms. But initially, do not underestimate the fighting resolve of fighting for your homeland. It's one of those massive imponderables when you look at wars. Which is the reason why yeah, it's one of those things you can't factor in. So
That's a good word. I've never even heard it.
Welcome to British English, my friend. We have many of these types of words which you Americans can only but dream of. But when you can look at so many instances of countries that go through a revolution and then are invaded by a neighbor, the neighbor thinking that this country is going to be weak, and it utterly gets turned on its head. Big example, Iran-Iraq war, early 1980s. Saddam Hussein invades Iran thinking I'll get these oil fields in the southwest because the Iranians have gone through a revolution. They don't know the arse of their elbows, but filled with the revolutionary zeal and the fact you're fighting for your homeland, the Iranians pushed them back. You could do the Vietnam War, which is exactly the same type of thing, goes on and on and on. So don't just think that the Ukrainians were just propped up by Western arms, because no, their battle hardiness and their strategic nous is actually truly their own, because they're fighting for their homelands. They've seen their homes destroyed, etc. And it's a massive, as I said before, military imponderable. You don't know how strong people will fight when the backs are up against the wall when you're defending your home.
I think there's an opportunity here, at least for the United States. We're witnessing sort of a transition from an old conventional kinetic war to a highly technology-based conflict where the more technology is used, the fewer people are being lost on the battlefield, or at least that's a perspective, certainly a Ukrainian perspective or a bias from a Ukrainian standpoint. They're substituting drones for soldiers and having great success recently, 2-3 months, 60, 90 days, something like that. But why maybe perhaps is the U.S. so reluctant to flux a little bit of technological might if we're so damn sophisticated and mighty, is maybe my question. Like, why you don't see a chess master forego an opportunity to sit down at the board and move some pieces. Why are we so reluctant? Why are we so, shall I say, cowardice?
Let's not forget that this is the cheapest it's ever going to get to kill Russian soldiers. And for that alone, we got to weigh that in. Anson, you want to get some final thoughts here?
Yeah, I finally voted. I'm sorry the poll's still not up there, but I finally voted not to give an inch, but I say that de jure. And this is where I suggested earlier that we can maybe achieve peace with a de facto temporary cessation of land, i.e., have an armistice on the current battle lines, and then not cede land de jure through an ultimate peace treaty. In other words, a Korea-like situation. That could be an outcome of the war, and in then trying to figure out the final boundaries for a peace treaty would take extensive negotiations, recognizing something that I think Royfield has introduced, that Ukraine before 2014 was 25-30% Russian and the rest Ukraine, and now they are essentially 100% Ukraine with very little Russians in the current territory that's controlled by Kiev. And that means something, but it counters the moral stance of it's immoral for a country to invade another country and gain any land. And it's, and Royfield also said that's really just a European situation, European slant Eastern Asia or Western Asia situation, if you don't consider Russia European, and that people gain land all the time through wars in the Middle East, in Africa, and all over other places of the world. And the final thought that I would have is that this idea of Russia invading Europe if they gain traction in Ukraine. The last time I checked the map, the Soviet Union did not invade Europe, and they owned all of Ukraine. So I'm not particularly concerned about the considerations of if Ukraine does de jure give up land, that automatically means the next war is going to be across a NATO boundary. I'm not sure that argument holds much. That bucket holds much water. But it's a tough one. I don't have any firm convictions on this thing, one way or the other. But I can wrap it up with a de facto armistice ceding land, holding in abeyance a de jure peace treaty ceding the land legally such that world maps are drawn with new boundaries across the country of Ukraine. And I will also add that I don't think Putin will go for that kind of he's going to want a de jure. He's not going to settle for a de facto, and he may just keep fighting unless he gets a de jure peace treaty out of this thing. Good room. Again, good discussion. Thanks for doing it, Roger.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, everyone, I posted up top. You guys might want to RSVP. We're going to do the official money bomb for John Kitover for Congress. It's going to happen at 5 o'clock Pacific time, about an hour and a half from now. So you guys might want to RSVP that. Thanks for showing up. Make sure you join the Rational Discussion Group. We will we'll be back here 5 days a week talking about these things. And
Hey, I wanted to thank everybody. I just set up a campaign to contribute. Money will be used to recruiting on-the-ground people to get signatures on these ballots so we can get on the March primary. If you do want to contribute, that's what the money will be used for. Creatives for the media buys. So, hope you enjoyed this. This has been Rational Discussion Group. I can leave this room open if you want and mod everybody else. Replays are on. No reason to kill a positive vibration. But I've been working in my other office getting an event page set up and a donation page set up. It's pretty easy. If you want to invite people to this room, feel free. The official John Kitover Congress Money Bomb link is pinned above. It's standard time. If you go to johnforcongress.com, or I will pin the link here as well. Let me see if I can get it. It's on my X account. Let me see if I can.
you know that Clubhouse owns the rights to your voice.
That's right, exactly. They do, but you don't. Unless your buddy's streaming us. Is he streaming us in 27 rooms?
He's not here yet. So this room currently is not being streamed.
Are you still doing your 2 o'clock reasonable house room about national guard?
Oh, yeah. You've been acting as a moderator, and the room started 1:50 to make sure we didn't jump on the room.
Good to know. All right, well, I should probably do my pre-moderating warm-up exercises since I'm there. Well, enjoy your afternoon. Maybe I'll check with my agent, see if I can jump into room 150.
Is there a topic for 150, or we don't know yet? Oh, we have a topic. We're talking about what's happening in DC. Well, that's right. You said that. I apologize. Dude, this one juice some people up. You like the word juicy? Scarlet TT's like the word juicy? I like succulent better. Succulent has juicy. I like the word juicy. You're fun. Yeah, it's better than moist. You don't like the word moist? Women don't. I like it. I don't like when I'm moist, but I don't.
How can you not like moist and be a member of them in the march?
It's not so bad. Watermelon's pretty good. All right.
Lowers uric acid levels too, by the way. Fun fact.
Don't even know what that is, but I'll imagine that's good for you.
Very good for you.
And just in case people, medical said, although I'm not a doctor, I did read this once. If you have problems urinating, eat watermelon, obviously, but specifically the watermelon seeds help with urination problems. For anybody who needs to know that information.
The only urgency problem I have is urgency issues. Old wives' tale. I don't think those seeds should be clogging up the digestive system.
You can chew them finely, maybe grind them. You're gonna grind.
I seen him answer every question. Not to speak, talking.
Okay, so give me this set of all non-contingent. And if I get in trouble here, so that's a good thing. And then we have Yasi, and Yasi has two very important jobs. First, she is the producer. She keeps me on the straight and narrow.
Already comfortable then from the time that they owned that stock forward. So all that appreciation in the persons that passed away.
For some reason, it was
Respect anyone. And they tend to take over holy places of other religions, like the Jewish holy sites, like India.
Agree with some of the shit that they do. If they're spiritually, if that's what they are, we kind of have to follow that. That's a part of spirituality, which is a large part of caring for human beings. Just because it
Says she doesn't bark all the time, but it's like because they live in like out in.
and everybody's welcome on the stage. And also Marshall. We have Marshall.
Oh, thank you. Why I need her? Because yes, Marshall, you want to say anything about your moderation? We'll get to specifics on the topic as we go, but do you want to say good evening?
Good evening. I, in this room, try not to be political. I try to just do the base historical research for the room. So I am getting ready to go get a haircut. So I have to be. I gotta go wash my hair real quick, basically. But I'll be around, and if we need to look something up, I'll look it up and send it to Yazi if need be, and we can get back on that. I work in campaign politics for a living, and I found remaining assiduously non-political in your room is one of the best ways to help. So,
and it's very helpful, and we have some wonderful conversations. We don't always agree, but what I love about Marshall is that he is very fair-minded, and or patriotism, what a patriotic American does. And I think we agreed, although with some maybe a little reason. The main way we do that is by paying our share of taxes. Taxes are a difficult subject. They're hard to enforce. And one of the great things about last week's room is it helped me really think through the issue of enforcing the common will of the governed, and as it relates to taxes. That was not really on the direct topic, but I am interested in knowing from anyone on the stage what you think about no tips on taxes. Is it good or is it bad? And if you have an opinion about whether it's good or bad, tell me why. Is it a good thing or a bad thing?
May I answer?
Yes. You may, Mojo.
Not only is it a good citated, in fact, it was first brought up by Ron Paul when he was speaking in Nevada, and when Donald Trump started fit Nevada. The reason why I think it's a brilliant strategy is that tips in general is it's a gift, it's an extra. The idea of treating it like a wage has never made sense to me. It's something where they already collect a wage. Now we've normalized the practice of tipping them. Maybe if we normalized the practice of tipping people for any job that they do, that would be a good thing for them. But I'm not a big fan of looking for more ways to take money from employees. I'm looking for more ways to allow people to keep their money. And this one seems like a very obvious low-hanging fruit to allow people that live on the margins to keep more. It's not for everyone, and it's not unlimited. There's caps on how much income you can have and how much tax.
So, Roger, the first thing I heard is that you think it's good because a tip should be a gift, and it shouldn't be normalized as part of someone's salary. Is that a fair characterization of the first thing you said?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
The second thing, government shows that they can pass a balanced budget amendment and spend money wisely. I think that we should all be revolting. I think the 27 grievances that was sent to the king were much smaller grievances than the ones that I have today. And so absolutely, I would revolt. We have $37 trillion worth of debt and $100 trillion in unfunded liabilities. And I think it's high time for another.
What I think you said is you recognize that as a citizen, we all have a common obligation to pay for the common good, but you're not happy with the way the government is currently spending its money. Would that be a fair characterization?
Well, you and I might disagree on what the common good is. The only thing I want the federal government spending money on is military, police, and courts. I think everything else is a violation of our Constitution.
Okay, well, I'm not an accelerationist. I don't believe that the solution to our problems is to blow everything up. I'm an incrementalist, and I think we learn, we grow, we improve incrementally. Argue with how the money is spent, but you also recognize that if you could be persuaded that certain things are for the common good, you agree that we have
proposed to go about doing that would be with usage fees, lotteries, and things like that.
We'll get there, but next week you're going to love the topic, because the topic next day we're going to confine ourselves to how we define our common obligation. So I thank you for your participation and your basic consent or agreement that when something can be agreed that we need it in common, we should pay for it. Now we're going to discuss today how we do it.
I did work for Disney. That was my first adult job. And one of the things that happened there is that there are many cultures where the tip is considered part of the bill. And so a lot of people, from other countries thought it was part of the bill. I think, just like the previous speaker said, that it's a gift. And I think tipping culture is going through some transition right now. I think sometimes we're a little bit much for tips, but I really do think that it is a gift. And when I give somebody a tip, I'm saying thank you in a different way than just saying thank you.
That's right, Jim. And I am going to change my behavior towards people who give tips drastically, since the tips can't be taxed. I pay taxes on what I'm giving them. So I've had to pay a tax on the dollar that I'm giving to them, and they don't have to pay a tax on receiving it. It's unlike that in any other form of employment. If I have an employee and I pay that employee, I withhold payroll taxes and I withhold Social Security taxes. But as a worker in a restaurant or someone who receives tips, they don't have to pay taxes on it. And I think that if people want to grumble about what the government is doing, that is absolutely your right. But I think it's extremely unpatriotic to argue that you shouldn't pay taxes.
Poses the tariffs to the nation, poses the tariffs, and not buying those others. In other words, when it hits the port, we pay for it. Can we agree on that?
We will talk about that in a minute, Jim. I think I don't think the way you said it is what you mean, but we'll get to that in a minute. I think Grover Norquist is a complete coward. And I know that some people may disagree, but that's why next week we are going to talk about what does the government do that we really, really don't need? What can we live without? And I'm extremely eager to hear people's idea. I will give you, as it is paid for by some federal subsidies. And yes, it does make life for disabled people a hell of a lot easier. But as Roger says very eloquently, we have $37 trillion of federal debt. And if we have that kind of debt, maybe I shouldn't have paratransit. I'm perfectly willing to sacrifice that. And I hope that next week, rather than cowardly saying, let's blow the whole thing up, that people will come to this room with some ideas, some real serious ideas about what we can live without. So ultimately, there are three forms of taxation. They are consumption taxes, wealth taxes, and income taxes. Now, Roger might argue, and we'll get to this in a second, that there also are
there also are lotteries, and I will cover that. Consumption taxes, let's talk about those first. Those are the easiest form for the government to calculate. They are the easiest form for the government to collect by far. They also are voluntary in the sense that someone is choosing to purchase something, and just by virtue of the fact that they have purchased that thing, they are paying the tax. So it is a form of voluntary taxation, unlike the other two forms of taxation that we'll discuss today. They are also regressive. That means that they fall much harder on poorer people than wealthier people. I don't think anybody needs proof of that, but does anybody have any question about the fact that they are regressive? Okay, good. Excellent. I did mention that I would talk about lotteries. I think a lottery is, do we all know what a lottery is? It's an extremely inefficient use of a dollar. Now, I think we can agree that if you spend $10 and the government only gets one of those, and we call that a tax, that's an extremely inefficient tax. It also has a moral component, and some people may object to it, or some people may not object to it. That's the idea that you're encouraging people to gamble, essentially, or to voluntarily pay taxes. But as I said, if they want to voluntarily pay it, it's like if I have one of these deals at a restaurant where and maybe you get back 10 or 15 to the organization, that is very inefficient. So it is a kind of thing that they do, essentially. It is a thing that gives you something theoretically back for your tax dollar, but it's inefficient. I also think there is a moral component to it, in that the government is, with the lottery, encouraging particularly poorer people to spend money that they may not have. And I was a real believer in the lottery in California when it was put on the ballot in about 1987 or 88, I think. And my wife, women often have a better understanding of things. My wife talked me out of voting for it. And I am thrilled that she did, because about 10 years later, I heard all of these ads for the lottery that said, what if your number was picked and you didn't play? Well, you might as well go to Las Vegas. I have nothing against Las Vegas collecting tax on their revenue from gambling, but that's very, very, very different than the government encouraging gambling. I should also mention that sin taxes, that's a tax on cigarettes, a tax on alcohol, those are also sales taxes. So they are essentially trying to use social legislation to encourage certain behavior. In other words, we're going to make cigarettes more expensive so that fewer people smoke them, or we're going to collect taxes on alcohol to pay for the damage that alcohol does to our culture. I don't think that's a moral issue. Do we have any need to discuss this before we move on from sales tax and lottery?
I'd just like to say, Alan, that in regards to the sin, well, I'll say two things. One, here in Ontario, lotteries is a corporation that's run by the government. So it's the Ontario Lottery Corporation. It covers lotteries and all gambling in the province. Other than that, that's those that are on reserves. So that's how that's operated here. So they have their finger in it right away. And in terms of the sin taxes, I suppose morally they're trying to get people not to smoke or curb alcoholism, etc. But they raise a lot of money that way too. So I don't know how they can sit on both sides of the fence, but they do. So.
Well, personally, I'm a fan of sin taxes. I think, even though I think social legislation using the tax policy to enforce certain social ideas may not always be the wisest. I think sin taxes may be one of the best.
I'm on the opposite side. I'm for tax credits for sinning. Like, you fornicate twice and you get a tax credit. Like, that would be my thought.
The Reverend Scott Jones has been heard from. can I just say I would be really interested in having that run by the church. All right, that's. You never know.
But that would put asses in the seats. That kind of preaching puts asses in the seats.
Yeah, and that's what collection plates for.
Well, I think Scott's idea of the collection plate is people should take money out of it and not put money into it. I don't know. But anyhow, you missed a doozy on that one, Reverend Jones. Okay, so by the way, tariffs are also a tax. And I think it's really important. If Abby was here, and I wish she were, because she tried to argue this with me once, as far as anybody is concerned, when they purchase something, they are paying a tax. And in that sense, it is a tax. And in that sense, it is important that we tell the truth about it. And a tariff is a tax. Does anyone want to argue with me on that? Good. I'm glad to hear that. All right. Now, the second form of taxation is wealth taxes. I'm sure Roger and I are not going to completely agree on this, but I would love to try to come to a compromise with him on it. Wealth taxes, I don't mean what Elizabeth. Okay. Hearing none. It's an income tax. No, capital gains.
Okay.
Capital gains and capital gains are gains on an asset. You bought a stock at 10, you sold it at 100, and you pay a certain tax on that gain. Capital gains is a very clear form of wealth tax, and I would add to it that it's fairly easy to calculate. It's fairly easy to collect. Now, we have some discussions about long-term capital gains and short-term capital gains, and if somebody wants to engage in that discussion, I'm perfectly happy to engage in it. The current idea is that you pay less tax if you hold something more than a specific period of time. I believe it's a year. And you pay more tax if you turn it over quicker. If I were writing the tax law, I would absolutely argue that we need a third form of capital gains tax, and this would not be for necessarily to raise revenue. It would be to discourage a behavior, and that would be day trading, a huge tax on day trading. Why? Because day trading doesn't help anybody except the trader. It does nothing for in fact, it hurts other traders because it'll make the price of stocks deviate more widely. So we could debate that at some point, but that would be one of the things I would point. Another form of wealth tax is property tax. And I thought about this for a while, but we're not going to talk about property tax much in this on property that I'm aware of, at least. If some tax eagle was here, they might argue with me on a small finer point, but that's pretty much it for wealth taxes. Does anybody want to discuss anything about wealth taxes specifically? The idea that I have for it came up last week, and it's for dealing with reparations. Historically, the black community has suffered from things that have kept their wealth from growing. Giving blacks a higher allowance on their estate taxes than everyone else. But that's for another day. It's just one idea, and I'm not saying it's necessarily a good idea. But I think
there's not, like in that instance, like you would get like somebody like Barack Obama who wouldn't qualify for it, and Michelle Obama who would, right? I mean,
yeah, you'd have to prove that one member of the couple was a descendant of slaves, and I think it would be. What I like about your question, Scott, is it gets to the essence. I don't know if Roger is still in the room, but if he is, he was given a very good piece of advice, tax advice, the other day in a room, and I didn't get a chance to say it. It may not be to his personal liking, and I respect that, and I don't think the government should ever tell people how they should at that level. And Roger isn't even at that level, so it doesn't matter if what he told me is true, it doesn't even matter. But I would favor bringing the.
I wanted to acknowledge that while Roger is not in the room, he left, but his cohort and my good friend Anson is here. Okay, Anson, congratulations on the beginning of your new room, and I want to know, where are you getting such creative titles? I mean, you guys are oozing creativity. I love it. Congratulations on the rooming.
You can respond to that, Anson.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. We're at least the first room poached right off of the critical thinking.
Second one tonight to the exact same title.
That was more. That was intentional poaching, but I'm not.
I'd like to touch on because it wasn't. There were no different prepositions or anything. It was based. It was
is to get the opportunity. Have a rational discussion rather than one person speaks, they go down to the audience, next person speaks. I really like the conversational mode and still being able to make forward progress. And thus far, we've been able to do that. We've only had 3 rooms, and we also have a poll in the room so that we can check what the room temperature is. In other words, is there an overwhelming sentiment one way or the other? And then see how that poll evolves as the discussion goes in the room. And it's interesting. I'm enjoying it, and I wish you guys the best over in the Critical Thinking Forum. But I just decided to try a different tact, and we're not trying to poach on your topic.
If you need me to copy the room titles to save you time, I could message them to you at like 4:45 just to save you time.
I'm sorry, I've got my hearing aids in, but I didn't hear what you said.
I said if it would save you time, I could get the room titles early, and I could message them to you, so that it just save you time.
Well, I think between Roger and myself and Steve and Moose, we'll be able to come up with some pretty interesting titles.
Well, if it passed this prologue, you had it, yeah. But I look forward to this, and I think you're a creative guy. I want to encourage you. I think you will.
Well, we're trying a different approach, really, in the way the room is controlled, and how people are allowed or not allowed to engage in a conversation as opposed to a speech.
And that is great.
That's what we're trying to do, and thus far, I mean, today I have no idea what the output was in the Critical Thinking Forum as to whether Ukraine should give up land or not. But I'll tell you, we had a wonderful discussion, and the difficulty. Hell, I didn't know how to vote in the poll. I mean, the difficulty of that subject is intense. But we really had a great discussion, and it was not just a one position decision. There was a real blend of more than anything, a blend of confusion and uncertainty as to what's in the best interest of America, Ukraine, and the world at large.
I think Vladimir Putin thrives on American uncertainty and ambiguity.
Of course he does. Of course he does. Of course he does. But and he sees it. He does everything in his power to stimulate that uncertainty. But we actually don't need much help from the Russians in that regard, because we are well. I'm not going to give my Great Divide speech, but I don't think Russia caused the Great Divide. I think we're causing it ourselves. But that's beside the point. But anyway, thanks for asking. And I'm going to stay up here on the stage. I don't really have any prearranged thoughts on your topic. I'm interested in the conversation, and I might inject myself somewhere along the line here.
I encourage everybody to learn how to make better use of Clubhouse. I want to see it be a better venue for discussion. And I think, Anson, before you came, we talked about the challenge in America with all of the different kinds of it. To me, that suggests that they aren't very deep. that their thoughts are just, how can I make a point for my side? I have no interest without people getting on their soapbox. Anyway,
what consumption, wealth, and what was the third form of taxation? Income. What's the difference between wealth and income?
Oh, it's huge. Wealth tax is a tax on an asset. It's something that's on your
in asset value appreciation, and the other one is maybe it's income it kicks off.
Let me clear my foggy old mind here. If I make $100,000 a year and pay tax on it, that's income tax.
That's all income.
If I have of $100,000 in a year, that is wealth tax.
That's a capital gain.
Both get taxed.
No,
but
yes,
that's wealth tax.
This is when Mitt Romney ran against Barack Obama.
Okay,
Barack Obama paid the highest.
But income from assets is income itself, but we do not have a wealth tax